Good evening, and thank you for watching. My name is Luigi del Puerto. I'm the associate publisher and editor of the Arizona Capital Times, and I'll be the moderator for this evening's debate. The Citizens Clean Elections Commission is the sponsor of this event. As the state's voter education agency, Clean Elections hosts debates so voters have the opportunity to hear directly from the candidates, ask questions on the issues that matter the most to them, and vote informed. Candidates that have a contested primary election have been invited to participate in the debate. Candidates that have opted into the Clean Elections Clean Funding Program are required to participate, while traditional candidates are invited and encouraged to attend. The questions that will be asked this evening are coming directly from voters. Leading up to the debates, Clean Elections conducted outreach to voters across the state, soliciting questions for the candidates. If you're watching this debate live, please submit your questions at any time by email. The address is debates@kc-a.com. Again, that is debates@kc-a.com. Or by texting 928-362-1062. 928-362-1062. Or by calling 480-937-1297. Again, the phone number is 480-937-1297. We screen questions for clarity to eliminate duplication, speeches, or personal attacks on candidates. The debate tonight is scheduled for 30 minutes, so we may not get to all of your questions, but we will do our best. This is, of course, a respectful, courteous, and professional environment. Our goal tonight is to connect our candidate who is joining us tonight with the voters, so that our voters or you, the electorate, may vote informed. And of course, joining us tonight is Mr. Hop Nguyen, who is running for the Arizona State Senate. Mr. Nguyen, you will have the opportunity to do an opening and a closing statement. And in fact, the floor is yours, sir. Take it away.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have to start by explaining why I'm running for office. I have been of course, I am an immigrant from Vietnam, 45 years. Actually, I turned 62 last Sunday, and 45 years ago, I turned 17 at sea. I have seen the overreaching of government to the point of communism, to the point of oppressing the people. And as an immigrant to the United States, I find that the freedom that we enjoy is very fragile, even though we have the right to go out and do what we want to do and to conduct commerce. It is fragile because there are always those who would want to put us under subjection. And this is why I am running. The only document that I see that is keeping communism and oppression away from these United States is the U.S. Constitution. And as such, it needs to be protected. It is not, I don't want to protect the Constitution for the sake of protecting it, because what the Constitution states is that every single one of us, every single citizen has the right, has the privilege to be free. And that is my focus, not a piece of paper, but what it stands for freedom.
Mr. Nguyen, thank you, Mr. Nguyen. Thanks for that. You mentioned communism a couple of times, but before we actually get to that, you also said that when you were 17 years old, you found yourself at sea, and I think if you could explain the circumstances behind why you were at sea when you were 17 years old. Um, Take us a little bit back into what the history there.
Okay. Um, Not to, if I can take you back, it will be the entire evening. But
Yeah, let's not do
suffice it
that.
to
Yeah.
say, yeah, suffice it to say, my father, we were a military family. My father um, was actually part of the North Vietnamese uh, army, and when Vietnam was divided, he escaped with his wife, with his bride, to South Vietnam, and he joined the South Vietnamese army. Um, and as such, we have our family pretty much had a target on our backs because of being labeled as traitors to the cause. Um, so on the last day of the South Vietnam regime, which was April 29, um, we uh, just had to uh, do something because we knew that if we had stayed, we would have been killed.
You're talking about the fall of the South Vietnamese
All of
government,
sign,
right? Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes. Um, so my father had scoured the city for ways to get out. We did not have the funds or the resources to fly out or escape. Um, so he scoured the city and he saw a, a, a villa that had an iron gate and a stream of people walking in. And so we just trusted in God and packed up the whole family and slipped right through. And uh, behind the gate, the U.S. soldiers had uh, directed us to uh, the riverbank and put us on an ammunition barge and pulled us out to sea. And that was the adventure at sea that we were on. And 2 days later, we were picked up by the U.S. Navy ship that took us to the Philippines.
And from the Philippines, that's how you flew to, if I heard you correctly earlier, California. That's where you ended up in.
Yes, sir.
So, thanks for telling us a little bit about your history and how you immigrated to the United States. Um, I think at this point I want to ask you a couple questions about this crisis that's changed dramatically the way that we have lived, and this is an unprecedented crisis. And government stepped in a variety of ways. Now, as to your point about you now wanting to see government intervene, one of the things that has happened, as you know, is that the governor initially issued an order for Arizonans to stay at home with exemptions for essential businesses. I guess let me start with that then. Do you agree with the governor's um, decision to um, um, issue a stay-at-home order, and even before that one, to close down some of the businesses? For example, restaurants. He ordered them not to serve dine-ins, like takeouts only, and then that was followed, of course, by the stay-at-home order for the entire state with exemptions, with the exemption for essential businesses.
I agree to a point. At the beginning of the pandemic, I would agree that uh, uh, people should stay home to avoid any type of a contact that could be dangerous for them or dangerous to others. But um, when I looked at the numbers as far back as February 28th, when we had in the United States, we only had 66 cases of confirmed uh, uh, COVID-19 and one case of death. Um, I thought even at that point it was a cautious move on his part. But as the days go on and the weeks go on, and we see the numbers not attaining to what the alarmists uh, are, um, are publishing, I grew concerned. I, would, I grew concerned because not because we are closing restaurants anymore, but we actually have larger businesses still open. And to me, the decision to allow a certain businesses to open and others to close is a little bit inconsistent, and that is a problematic, very problematic for me.
You mean to say, sir, and correct me if I'm wrong here. You mean to say that we have, for example, big retail stores that are open, and because they're open, whatever the businesses are inside, uh, they're able to conduct continue their business, and you have maybe a smaller mom and pop shop across the street that's affected by the uh, stay at home or the order not to open because they're not deemed to be essential. Is that what you're saying, sir?
That's correct. Um, it is not just the inconsistencies, because even if today you go to Walmart or Sam's Club, you will see crowds. Now, the purpose for to the reason that we want to stop the pandemic is to have social distancing to avoid personal contacts, and I agree with that. But whatever the decision needs to be administered across the board fairly. Um, at this point, we have large box stores, large businesses that have not been closed ever, and they are still able to do business. But you have the mom and pop shops that are right now are going out of business because they could not sustain themselves even with the takeouts.
So I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Nguyen.
Let me give you an example. I have a friend up in Pleasant Lake. He was investing into a limousine business. He had purchased uh, uh, some 5 limousines that he needed to use for his business. Uh, right before the shutdown, um, his business went from 100% booked for the next 3 months to 0%. Now, we think that, well, there are small business loans. We have small business loans to help these people, but that's not the case because um, even the administration of the business loans is just very spotty. And right now, he still has to pay the dealership for his, for his vehicles, but he has no business.
Um, right. A lot of people find themselves in that situation. You mentioned that the numbers, COVID-19 numbers, so I'm presuming you're referring to number of infections and number of deaths, have not risen to what you would describe as the alarmist picture painted earlier. And I want to just flesh that one out a little bit because I do wonder, for example, if what you find yourself is where we find ourselves in some sort of a paradox, right? The more we social distance, the more we uh, the more the government imposes or adopts these measures, for example, shutting down some of the businesses, etc., and in a way limits our interaction with people. Then uh, the fewer infections there are as a result of these actions, and because we have fewer infections as a result, then you could say that yeah, the alarmists initial models didn't work. And I do wonder if what you make of the fact of what you make of people who would say yeah, of course it you don't see the alarmists numbers bear out because of the measures, precisely because of the measures that were put into place.
Um, I'm a math major, so I do a lot of calculations. Even back in early late February and early March, I've sat down and I calculated the uh, I compared COVID-19 and the normal seasonal flu. Okay, and the number that I came up with was very startling. Um, you would have to have um, we can take the 12 annually, we have somewhere between 20,000 to 60,000 people die from the seasonal flu. Okay, now uh, calculating into allowing for statistics that are very young, I have calculated, and I find that in order for COVID-19 to even catch up to the statistics of the um, seasonal flu, there would have to be 280,000 people die from it, and we are nowhere near that. Now we're talking about a huge percentage. It's not 50% or 20%, but it's a huge percentage. You have to have 280,000 people died of COVID-19 worldwide to even begin to equal to the lower limit, not the higher limit, but the lower limit of the seasonal flu. Now,
What do you make of the what do you make of the of people who would counter argue that there are major differences between the a what you would refer to as a regular flu and COVID-19, right?
mm,
In terms, for example, just one, they would point to the fact that in a with a regular flu, you do have vaccines. There is a remedy to it that you can, uh, you know, uh, use, whereas in with COVID-19, there are no vaccines, there are no remedies, and it's up to your body to kind of fight it. And at that point, if you get it, um, there are it's not the same as the flu. I do wonder, what do you make of that argument?
well, there are two flaws to that argument. First of all, um, there's no such thing as a perfect vaccine for virus. There isn't, because you will, as you've said, we have a vaccine for the seasonal flu, right? Why do we still have 20 to 60? This is in the U.S. Why do we still have 20 to 60,000 deaths annually? And it comes to show, it goes to show that the the vaccine itself is not capable of stopping those deaths. And
But
I don't know if that there is uh, a way that we can stop those, even the flu. The normal, regular, everyday cold is also a viral infection. And how many uh, how much time have we spent with the CDC or different drug companies? They still cannot come up with a vaccine for the normal cold.
so at this point, Mr. Nguyen, the governor has taken some steps to slowly start reopening the economy, as you know. So, for example, um, he had allowed some retail businesses to voluntarily open, I think starting today, if I'm not mistaken, and then to expand their operations, right? But they have to follow certain guidelines, for
I
example. So there,
believe I believe only beauty shops are allowed to open on Friday, and restaurants are not allowed to open until next Monday. If
I
I'm
think
incorrect.
you are correct, but the he is starting to reopen the economy. There is a contingent of legislators right now who are proposing to rescind the governor's executive order, which is different from the stay-at-home order,
Mm-hmm.
and say, look, we let's get rid of the executive order, let's reopen the economy immediately. I wonder what you make of the proposition, whether you agree with it, and why if yes, and why not if you don't agree with it.
Are you referring to the plan for the legislators to rescind the order?
Yeah,
Uh,
there are some of them that are proposing it, and of course there are institutional barriers to actually proposing the measure because they're not in session right now. But there are a number of legislators who say
I
let's
have,
rescind that order.
first of all, I am deeply, deeply troubled that the legislators are are not in session during a pandemic such as this. Um, it troubles me because we vote for these legislators to protect us, and they are on our MIA during this pandemic, and it troubles me to no end. Um, Second, uh, I think that at this point, proposing to rescind the governor's stay-home order is
Executive order.
his executive order is a bit too late, and I think it should have been planned earlier on. But here's the issue. Here's the issue. The issue is, and I spoke to you about fleeing communism. I spoke to you about that document that most Americans don't understand and don't know if they would care about understanding, and that is the Constitution. The Constitution does not get suspended because of an illness. Um, the Revolutionary War was fought when there was a pandemic, and I believe it's in smallpox. And I believe, from what I heard, 1 out of 3 soldiers died from the smallpox. 1 out of 3. And the Revolutionary War was fought within that setting. Now, I'm not saying that we are in a war, but I believe that, let me qualify this. I believe that the COVID-19 is true, is real, okay? I'm not one of those deniers. It is real. It needs to be controlled, but it also needs to be balanced with what the law of the land is, which is the Constitution. It needs to, the governor himself has reached a decision that is unbearable because he's violating the Constitution of the United States.
When you say he's violating let me back up a bit. When I say the executive order, I mean specifically the emergency declaration of the governor. That's the basis for many of his other executive orders. And so there's a contingent among legislators to try and rescind that. When you say I want to shift to another subject real quick, but I want to ask you, when you say the governor violates the Constitution, are you referring to the U.S. Constitution? I'm supposing you're referring to the U.S. Constitution.
Yes.
How is he exactly violating that?
The freedom of movement, the freedom of commerce is guaranteed. Okay, it's not guaranteed by the Constitution, but it's declared by the Constitution. Now, if I were to be afraid to get sick, I have the right to stay home. Now, to me, staying 6 feet apart from each other and wearing masks is fine. Okay, that is what you need to do. But to shut down the entire economy, you realize that 30% of businesses are in jeopardy right now. In the next few months, you will see Chapter 11 counts go up tremendously. How can we justify something that is not as serious as the season of flu and shut down and destroy 30% of the economy?
You mentioned the state of the economy, and you're right about uh, uh, the fact that we've shut down huge portions of the economy, and that's creating significant hardships on a whole lot of people, including the state government, for example. And I can tell you that the state legislature's budget arm, the budget analysts, uh, estimated this was a couple weeks ago that the state will face a $1 billion deficit as a result of the economy in a virtual standstill. And I wonder, just really quickly, sir, how would you propose to resolve $1 billion deficit? And just for context, the state's budget is around 11-12 billion dollars, something like that. And so we're facing a $1 billion deficit as a result of this crisis. And I wonder, um, how do you propose to resolve that if you were elected to the Arizona legislature?
I would ask you the same question. If you were to lose your job, how would you resolve your deficit, your own deficit in your home? If your wife were to lose her job and you were to lose your job, what would you do?
Well, if you're asking me personally, there are a couple options, right?
Yes.
You're looking at your expenses and trying to see where
Mhm.
you can save there. You may have to go into borrowing if that's really necessary. Um, and so there are a couple things you can do in your own home if you face a situation in which you lose a job.
That's exactly the answer that I would give you. Um, we have to tighten up our belt. We don't have a choice. There's you have to maintain a balance sheet. Uh, you cannot if you're an accountant, your incoming, okay, and your outgoing has to be balanced. You cannot spend more than you have. It's pure and simple. It's not rocket scientist. It is just a basic principle of accounting. So we are faced with a pandemic. We are faced with a shortfall in the state. We need to look at where we can cut out. And as painful as it is, we have to do that. Now, um, I'm going to say something that is counterintuitive. Okay, right now you have people who have lost their jobs, lost their businesses, they their savings are gone. They need help, and I think the counterintuitive move of the government, if I were to be elected, is to actually cut taxes. There are two benefits to cutting taxes at this point of the condition of our state. First of all, that is that goes to help those who are struggling with lost jobs, lost businesses, and lost savings. Do you know that right now the teachers their retirement fund is in the market, and the last few weeks the market has gone down 30%. So if a teacher has $10,000 in their retirement account, now it's down to $7,000.
Everybody who has a 401k or some kind
Yes.
of a
Okay.
savings that's tied
So
to the stock market. Yep.
yes. So they need help, like like tax cuts, but there is a tremendous benefit to the tax cut that I have not seen any legislator mention. I have, during my campaign, I have spoken to a lot of people, especially in LD22, retirees, and their reason for not moving permanently to Arizona is because of taxes. If we cut that taxes, it will also serve to attract more people to the state. The economy is going to recover much quicker because of all the income that will be brought in and be spent in the state. So
So
those are the two Those are the two benefits of tax cut.
So I think we're at the minute 30 mark, and I think we met the threshold for the debate. But I do want to ask you if you want to continue, because if I'm not mistaken, unless Clean Elections says otherwise, I think we do have the option to continue the debate maybe for maybe 15 more minutes, something like that, if you
Sure.
want to do it. All right,
Sure.
cool. So I think at this point, I want to remind the viewers that if you want to send in your questions, go ahead and do it via the numbers and the email that I mentioned before. So by email, the address is debates@kc-a.com. You can also text your questions to 928-362-1062, or you can call 480-937-1297. Mr. Nguyen, at this point, I want to shift a little bit to some of the measures or some of the issues that you probably will encounter in the state legislature if you were elected. Among them, of course, is some of the social issues that have become sort of hallmarks, right, in the state capitol, in terms of debates on the floor in both the House and the Arizona Senate. So I want to ask you, because you're a former pastor, if I'm not mistaken, and so what is your position on abortion? More specifically, I want to ask you, would you prohibit abortion at all stages of the fetus's, of the baby's life, if you will?
I will ask you a question too, sir. You obviously came from the Philippines, and what is the Asian concept of life?
I'm thinking through. I'm trying to see what the
Let me clarify. Let me clarify. Let me clarify. When you were born, how old are you?
Well, if you were to ask me, and I think I know where you're going with that one. So in Korea, for example, if the day you were born, you're not 1 day, right? You're 1 day plus a time of the number of months that you spent in your mother's womb. So correct. I think that's what you're referring to, correct?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So I guess your answer would be you would disallow abortion at any stage.
Yes.
What do you make of what about the counter argument that a woman should be able to choose, at the very least, in cases, for example, of incest or rape, for example? I do wonder what you think of that.
Okay. First of all, the concept of choosing has to do with individual rights. Unfortunately, we forget that child, once we define that child as a human being, that child has individual rights too. So when you choose, when you have a right, when you declare that you have a right, but you deprive the right for another person, then it's not a right. Okay. Second, you brought up a good point. What if it's incest? What if it's rape? In our system of jurisprudence, we penalize, we punish the criminal. Unfortunately, in the case of abortion due to rape and incest, you are penalizing the innocent for the crime of another.
You're talking about an abortion. You're talking about the fetus, right?
Yes.
Right. So we have some. There is one other issue that I want to talk to you, and that has been a.
Let me go back and qualify. Let me
Right.
go back and qualify. Okay. It sounds heartless. It sounds heartless that I don't want a person who's in distress, who's been raped, or who's had suffered incest. I'm prohibiting that person from resolving a problem. Resolving a problem doesn't mean killing another being. If you go you go into the wild. Let's say you go into your, oh, even in the Phoenix Valley, and you find a nest, a goose nest that, a Canada geese that laid eggs there, and you destroy that nest. They're just eggs. They're not even, they're freshly laid. They're not even um, babies. Do you know that you will be fined and jailed for that act? Now, if we take that concept and we apply it to humans, why do we understand that a bird or an egg is a living being, a living thing, but we cannot understand that a child is not a living thing?
So
That is
yeah,
inconsistent.
so I don't want to. I want to flesh that one out just real quick. In the instance that you mentioned, for example, the what do you make of the argument that it should be the woman's right to choose and not yours, because it is not your body; it is the woman's body.
Yes, it is a woman's body, but where does the child's body play into the argument? Often it's not in there, and that's a sad thing.
So if you were to extend the logic of where you're coming from on this issue, um, in our jurisprudence, for example, there is no penalty for the woman making an abortion. Right. So I want to ask you, if it's so abhorrent as you mentioned, then shouldn't the woman then penalize as a result for making an abortion? And what is your answer to those who would point that out?
Well, first of all, good or bad, she is protected by the law. Okay, but there should be. I imagine that there are two types of laws. Laws are made up by man, but you need to understand that there are laws that are made by God. Now, it may be the concept of God may be archaic to others, but we all apply that because we we tell others that, hey, you don't have the right to kill me. What gives me the right to say that you can't kill me?
So
Because that is the law of God. It is ethics. When a politician commits corruption, oh, for sure, he follows the law. He skirts the law. He is just right to the edge of the law, but he still follows the law. But he commits corruption. We look down on that person. Why? Because that person broke the law. May not. Because he could get a lawyer and be acquitted. But it doesn't mean that that person did not break the law. So we need to understand that there are laws beyond beyond what's on paper, what's in the book. Now, do I don't mean to sound having not having compassion. Those women need to be cared for. They need to be counseled. They need to be protected. They need to be protected from the rapes. The rapists need to be punished for his crime. But we cannot say that, well, let's get rid of the problem. Well, the problem is still there. How many women who had abortions ended up having mental problems because we did not allow them to, we do not let them solve the real problem. We wanted to get rid of the immediate inconvenience. That's the problem. It has the life of the child is important, but the life of the woman is just as important.
you're making a your argument is there's a difference between the laws of the land and the laws of what you might consider to be higher or transcendental laws, if you will. Let me shift to a couple questions that we've gotten from your district, sir.
Mm-hmm.
So, what issues would you consider to be most important to LD22?
LD22 has a lot of elderlies, and they need to be protected. I think the tax laws within LD22 is not fair for these elderlies because they are nearing their golden age. They are in their golden years. They they have what they have as far as their retirements. I think it's a travesty of justice to require them to pay taxes as though they are young people. They have paid all their lives.
So what are you proposing to do exactly insofar as the tax issue you raised? Are you saying let's cut taxes for the older population? Is that what you're saying, sir?
No, I want to cut taxes across the board. And that's what I mentioned before. We are at the stage of of our state where it is it's not very intuitive to cut taxes. But this is what we need to do because we help those who are affected by this COVID-19 issue. But we also attract other incomes from other states. Because I have, like I told you, I spoke to many retirees, snowbirds, who would refuse to come here and stay here because we still have a tax structure for retirees
So
and
here,
for veterans. Veterans should not be taxed for whatever um, pension that they draw. They paid their debt. They invested into our lives and our safety. We deserve, they deserve to be taken care of also.
here's another question. How do you plan on supporting the medical staffers, the teachers, and all those who are working to keep our communities healthy and safe if the quarantine continues longer than initially expected?
I think I've said this before, but we need to tighten up our belt somewhere. Okay, here's my let me give you an example. You mentioned teachers. The 2020 budget that Governor Ducey signed included 20% pay raises to teachers
Over 3 years, yes.
spread
Yep.
over 3 years.
Yep.
Unfortunately, there is no way for the state to monitor and make sure that the teachers will have those 20% raises. There is no way. Now, the reason for that is because if you ask an everyday, more normal teacher, he or she will think that he or she works for the state, but they don't. They work for the school board, for the school district. The school district dictates how much raise they get. Now,
If
there's a
I'm not
discrepancy
mistaken,
there.
yeah, if
There's
I'm
a
not
discrepancy.
mistaken,
Yeah.
I'm
Hold on.
sorry, I didn't want to cut you, but I think if I'm not mistaken, there are the school districts are putting up on their websites how much they're providing teachers with the pay raises, and I think the auditor general also conducts these audits, and that would show to what extent teachers are indeed getting the raise, and so there is a mechanism for us for the state to track if teachers are indeed getting these pay raises.
And I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that. But those mechanisms are obviously flawed because I have spoken to teachers. I have spoken to teachers during my campaign.
And they've told you that they have.
Let's just okay, 20% over 3 years is, well, let's take 7%. I don't know of any teacher in the past year who's had 7%. Is it 10% or is it 5%? What is it? It's we cannot. If I can see someone have 7% in the past year, 7% raise, then I may be wrong, but I don't think so. Here's the thing: the state currently, even at this point, is spending money like a drunken sailor, but it's not benefiting those people who's who are it's meant for. The teachers are not the teachers are not getting it. Healthcare, I don't know about the healthcare uh, workers. I don't know about law enforcement.
I think the question is that how are you going to help, set aside teachers for a moment. What about medical staffers? What about other workers who are keeping the communities healthy and safe? If this quarantine, if this stay-at-home order, lingers on longer.
There has to be a reason for the well, this that is a supposition that we're going to have to discuss, because how long is it? Is there a reason for this lockdown to continue? Now, if there is no more reason for for the governor to continue his executive order, then he needs to stop. First of all, now we're discussing, supposing, and I agree with you that yes, what if this is the worst scenario? But what I was going to get to when I talked about teachers that they pay raises, okay, is we are spending money that are not benefiting the people that are it's meant for. Now, if we have better oversight, I'm not talking about control. Please don't go tell people that I want the education system to be controlled by the state. That's the furthest furthest from my mind. There has to be oversight. It is simple business principles. If you as my business, you're as my employee, and I give you a certain amount of money to invest on equipment, you better give me the receipts for those equipments to justify what you spent. It's not rocket science. We have to look at all these little nooks and crannies and determine where are we spending too much that is not benefiting.
So
I'm not talking about being a miser. Sometimes we talk about, well, this guy is fiscally conservative. It's fiscally conservative doesn't mean that you are a miser, that you take money away from people. You, as I work for, I used to work as a project manager, as a project manager. And as a project manager, before I go into a project, I calculate the ROI. What is the return on investment? So now, if I'm going back to the example of the teachers, if I give the school district 20% raise, I better see that 20% raise percolating down to the teachers, because that's what they deserve. Now, if they get 5 to 10%, and I would question the school district, where is that remainder?
Yeah. Do you know if your school districts in your district, for example, are in fact not providing 20% pay raise to teachers?
I don't know.
Okay.
But I don't know to the other side either. Until I see that it's proven that it's 20%, then it's incumbent upon the school district to prove it, not on me to prove it.
So let me ask you another question about education as well. So one of the questions that came in is asking about how do you plan on supporting students who are losing the opportunities to gain, for example, industrial experience or um, or real life experience in a company, for example, internships, all those kinds of things as a result of the quarantine, as a result of the stay at home order. Um, really as a result of this pandemic? How do you plan on supporting them, helping them out?
I need to see the executive order removed. Plain and simple.
You mean the emergency declaration,
we
right?
cannot lock down an entire state and cut out 30-40% of our income and then sit there and ask, where are we going to get the money? We need to solve the problem. If the pandemic is justified, yes, but so far the numbers have not justified it. So I don't want to create an artificial problem and then look for a solution. There's no solution to an artificial problem. Remove that artificial problem, first of all, and then everything will go back into order. Now, I've spoken about lower taxes, okay, and that will help those people who are hurting. And that will attract more business, that will attract more retirees or veterans who can come and spend their money. Now, that is the best way to grow the economy. But right now, the emergency is how do we help these people when we're tied up with this executive order? We need to untie the hands of businesses. We need to untie the hands of hospitals. We need to untie the hands of everyone so that they can hire people. They can give opportunities to people who don't have internship, there's no internship if there's no businesses open.
So you're saying the root of the problem is that there's an emergency declaration. Some businesses are shut down. You can't really move the economy forward until you lift the emergency declaration, unless you reopen the economy, and until then,
Yes.
you're kind of limited in your options. Correct?
Yeah. We shoot ourselves in the foot and we wonder why we limp. Let's heal the foot. Let's heal the foot. Then everything will go back to in order.
So I think at this point, I think we've had we extended our time, Mr. Nguyen.
Mhm.
I think they're now nearing 1 hour. I do want to ask you just one more question, because this
Sure.
thing is going to come back in the state legislature as an issue.
Mhm.
For example, if they resume session this year, it may come up as an issue, but I'm pretty certain that next year it will be. And that is the issue of transgender women in women's sports. There is a proposal by a representative to prevent transgender women from joining women's sports. And I wonder what you make of the whole issue. First of all, I wonder if you agree with this proposal.
To me, it comes down to the determination whether a person is male or female. It has to do with DNA. It has to do with what that person is truly. I cannot pretend to be something that I am not. It doesn't matter how I feel. And let me ask you this. I don't mean to peg you in a hole, but as a Filipino, you are most likely Catholic.
In fact, I am not.
Okay, that's fine. Okay.
A lot of Filipinos are. A lot of Filipino Americans are.
Okay.
It's 85% Catholic. The Philippines is 85%
Okay,
Catholic.
then I won't.
I am not.
Then I won't mention that. Okay, but here's the thing. It has to do with science. It has to do with DNA. When a person all of a sudden thinks that they are male or female against their own gender, is it according to science? Is it according to physiology? Or is it according to what they feel? Feelings are notoriously unreliable. I can feel sad today. I can feel happy tomorrow. So when we talk about uh, having transgenders participating in a sport that is 100% of one gender or another gender, um, what are we saying? Is it
Do you see
fluid?
that? Do you see this as an issue of fairness? Is that what you're saying?
I'm sorry?
Do you see it as a fair no, as an issue of fairness?
Yes,
What
because
about those who would argue that you should be able to society should allow transgender women to join in any sport that they wanna choose. You mentioned, for example, emotions and feelings. They're kind of fleeting, right? They kind of change from day to day.
mhm,
What do you make of the argument that these are not emotions and feelings? They're pretty consistent, and a person may regard himself this way, you know, for very consistently. I wonder what you make of that counter argument.
is it consistent to their physiology? That's my question. What I feel, is it consistent to who I am, a physiology?
What do you make of those who say that? And I guess this is my last question for you. What do you make of those who say this is pure and simple discrimination?
Discrimination against what?
You discriminate against transgender people by disallowing them to join, for example, the sports that they want to join in.
Well, if a person who's a transgender wants to impose their will on another group, why would you call that discrimination? Who is discrimination against whom? You see
Well,
that?
the I think what's happening right now is that a lot of these decisions are made by sports associations, right? So they kind of decide whether to allow transgender people from joining, a sports in a certain gender, whether uh, in the specific case like women's sports, for example. So those
Okay.
decisions are kind of decided at the
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this.
associations levels.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Why is it that there are only transgenders who want to join women's sport and not the other way around?
You mean to say that uh, 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 other transgender men joining men's sports? Is that what you're asking?
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think they're already allowed to do it. I think
Yeah.
that
But here's the issue. The issue is if you are a man, physiologically, you are stronger. Regardless of who you call yourself, you are stronger. To join a sport where typically women are weaker, that is not fair. That is not even sportsmanship. You you have people who beat, who join sports like wrestling or boxing and who beat women to a pulp. Oh, how does that call sportsmanship? How does it call fair? We are talking about discrimination. Discrimination has to do with fairness, but we are imposing by 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 joining a group of people who are weaker than you and to dominate them. How is that called fair? How is that called discrimination? That is discrimination. That is the epitome of discrimination because you know that you can dominate all these women. That's to me that needs to be stopped.
And I think there is one more question that came in from our audience. I want to ask you this one just real
Sure.
quick, and I want to give our viewers the opportunity to ask you as many questions as they can.
Mhm.
You mentioned that your dad was in the military. If elected, what legislation specifically would you propose in support of veterans?
Of that what? I'm sorry?
What legislation, what proposal would you introduce to support veterans?
Veterans?
Yes.
As I've said, veterans are being taxed. They do not need to be taxed. I would like veterans to be tax-free.
And I think we are at the 1 hour mark, just at the 1 hour mark. So I think we can end our discussion here. I want to give you the opportunity to provide a closing statement, Mr. Nguyen, if you want to do it. You have, I believe, 1 minute or so.
Sure, sure. Um, I will have to come back to the Constitution as a document that protects us from overreaching of a government. Um, human right, if you and I came from the same part of Asia, and we know the atrocity that men have reported on men because they could. The Constitution is the only thing that protects all of us. It doesn't matter whether you are male, female, gay, transgender, or black, white, or whatever color, whatever your preference, the Constitution protects us all. And we need to think about that. We need to think about what is the government doing to us. 50 years ago, or 45 years ago, or 30 years ago, the government allowed us to do a lot of things. And you have seen with 9/11, we have the Patriot Act, which is not very patriotic because it created DHS, they created the airport TSA people. There is a concerted effort to control us all, and we are just being hemmed in one bit at a time. There needs to be a balance to that. I'm not saying that we are going to do away with government. Government is good so far as it protects its citizens. Thank you.
And this concludes our debate. To our candidate in this district, Mr. Nguyen, thank you so much for participating. To the voters, we thank you all who took the time to watch the debate and inform yourselves before the August 4th primary election. The Citizens Clean Elections Commission is your source for nonpartisan voter information, and we encourage you all to visit accleanelections.gov for all your voting needs. And again, my name is Luigi Del Puerto. I'm the associate publisher and editor of the Arizona Capital Times. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, Luigi. God bless you.